Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Keynote Lecture Series of the Public Space Academy. My name is Luisa Bravo. I'm the founder and director of the Public Space Academy. Today with me, I have Egle Pilipavichute. Hi, Egle.
Hello, Luisa. Hello, everyone. I would like to encourage you to ask questions during the whole lecture. Write those in the comment section below, and we will go through them at the end. Enjoy the lesson.
Thank you, Egle. Yes, please prepare your comments, your questions for the end of the lecture, because today we are actually very happy to welcome a very well-known academic scholar, Miodrag Mitrašinović, a professor of architecture and urbanism at Parsons School of Design, a division of the New School University. His professional and scholarly work has been published internationally, and he has served in a variety of scholarly, professional, and editorial roles. We also want to mention that Miodrag Mitrašinović is a member of the steering committee of the Public Space Academy. Welcome, Miodrag.
Hello, Luisa and Egle, and thank you for the invitation to be with you today.
So we're very happy, as I said, to have you with us, especially because today you will present a very relevant case study on public space. You have been working on this case study for a long time, right?
That's right. Yes, 10 years or so.
Yes, and you are working on a book and on a documentary film to present all your research findings on the ground, which is something very important for our learners at the Academy.
Yes.
Okay, so I will just give you the floor, and we will talk later during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Luisa. Well, hello to everyone. Happy to be with all of you here today. I will be talking about as Luisa mentioned, a case study, a place, a community in New York City that I have been observing, studying, engaging with in the last 10 years. This is not a full-time 10-year-long work. This is obviously has been on and off. Because as you will see through the presentation, there have been a lot of changes in Corona, particularly in relation to Corona Plaza, over the last 15 to 20 years. So the place I will show you first where it is for those of you who may be familiar with New York City. It's along Line 7, the Metro Line 7. The red square will show you where Corona Plaza is. So it's on the far east side of the city and of the Line 7, while on the left-hand side, the west side, you see that the last stop is 34th Street, Hudson Yards. I will tell you a little bit about that in a moment. So it's about a 12-mile stretch. And depending on what type of Line 7, express or local or whatever you take, and at any time of the day, it's about an hour and 15 minutes to get, or an hour and a half to get from one side to the next. The reason why this is interesting, also, let me just go back to this slide, is because Line 7 has usually been called colloquially either Immigrant Express or International Express. And the reason why is because the Line 7, I don't know, Luisa, can you see my pointer in the presentation?
Can you move your pointer, please?
Yes, I'm moving it. Can you see it?
Not really.
No. Okay, so I'll describe then. So when Line 7 crosses right in the middle of the slide, East River, what you see on the right is Queens, the borough of Queens. And Queens has been one of the most diverse boroughs, certainly the most diverse borough in the city, and one of the most diverse urban territories in the United States. It's over 700 languages is spoken literally between East River and, as you see, Flushing Main Street, the end of 7 Line. And the development of Queens very much also, particularly that kind of northeast Queens, has been very much also determined by the development of Line 7. In other words, with each new immigrant wave, Line 7 would continue further east. So this is the place we're looking at. It's Corona is the name of the neighborhood. Corona Plaza is right in the middle of the slide. On the right, you see Queens Museum, one of the main protagonists in the story of Corona Plaza. And here you can see a couple of views of basically Line 7 on the upper image, Line 7 to the left, moving towards Manhattan. So you see Manhattan in the background. And this is a picture taken from Roosevelt Avenue, which develops under Line 7. On the lower slide, you see basically Roosevelt Avenue underneath, and you see the what we call the elevated, which is of course the elevated steel structure over which the trains go back and forth, connecting this area to Manhattan. Here you see the Line 7 stop, the 103rd Street Corona stop on the upper level, and then below you see the plaza, and of course here you can also see how this entire urban kind of setting relates to Manhattan way back there. So as I said, the other side of the line is 34th Street, and basically both of these coincide with the mayorship of Michael Bloomberg, who was mayor of New York City for 12 years between 2001 and 2013 or 2014. Now, the difference between these two projects is that these signature projects of the administration, which are High Line to the left and Hudson Yards to the right, were basically the places where the administration invested over $5 billion and growing in order to create, first of all, this kind of private playground, luxury playground, I should say, and then the most expensive public park, which you can see on the right slide. I don't know if you can actually locate in the bottom part of the slide, of the right slide, the vessel, that kind of a sculptural piece in the middle of the Hudson Yards with kind of elliptic gardening around it. I don't know if you can see that. And then from moving up to the top of the slide, meaning in real life moving north, the Bella Asburg Park, which is basically the most expensive park ever made in the city. One thing that is a very long and complex story, which I will try to communicate very quickly here, is that most of these developments are a result of a plan which the city made after 2001. So after terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the so-called Ground Zero, I'm pretty sure everybody was familiar with that. The city had to somehow come up out of a economic and social and political deadlock. And so the administration created, that is Bloomberg's administration created a plan for the development of the city, which they tried to wrap into a proposal for the Summer Olympic Games of 2012. And that plan is known as the Olympic X plan. And I don't have the time to explain the whole plan, but basically what this amounted to is one of the most comprehensive development plan that in the history of New York City. That plan, and it's the first time in the history of the city that you have basically a central planning operation. That plan, however, also had to be based on a rezoning of existing lands. So they rezoned about 40% of existing land in New York City. And then if you look at this map, so the right-hand side, that black line, which develops out of that red Olympic square in the middle, that's basically Roosevelt Avenue. So that was supposed to be a fully fledged commercial corridor, which meant that much of what existed there had to be replaced by new commercial developments. Much of what exists there was also supposed to be made privatization ready, and I quote this, privatization ready, by this Plan NYC, which at face value looks as a very interesting and very good plan to make basically New York City a greener, more sustainable, a more resilient city. But some of the instruments created here are going to be of our interest today. One of the instruments, one of the public policies basically, it was called the New York City Plaza Program. At that time, Public Plaza Program. And the program was interesting because what it wanted to do is first to create public spaces or public plazas along Broadway in order to really introduce the pedestrianization of Broadway. That was one of the major projects for which, in fact, Jan Gel's office was also hired as a consultant. But then the plan expanded. So the plan was introduced in 2008. In 2009, the plan expanded to create public plazas across the 5 boroughs. And you can see here, there are around 90 plazas that have been created through the plan to this day. The idea was, in fact, interesting, and I would say even a good idea. In fact, to distribute public spaces, public plazas, in the neighborhoods where there have not been any public spaces, working class and immigrant neighborhoods, overcrowded and super dense neighborhoods with very little green cover and no places to gather, no places to meet. The idea of the plan was to create a situation in which every resident or citizen of New York would have a quality public plaza within a 10 to 15 minute radius, walking radius, right? So these images here are basically the Corona Plaza as it was. In fact, it wasn't really a plaza at all. It was a thoroughfare, a parking lot, as you can see on the upper image. And on the lower image, you see the plaza, after the temporary plaza was installed in 2012. So this is a stop of 103rd Street and Corona Plaza. And you can see here how this urban configuration stands. So now that I don't have a pointer, right in the middle of the slide is the Queens Museum. Queens Museum is situated in a building that was the first ever headquarters of the United Nations. Once the building of the UN, the famous UN building, was completed, UN moved out of the building, and at some point later, Queens Museum basically moved in. What you see just above, this is obviously done. The image was done during the COVID time, so you can see a medical. Medical worker, service worker below, imprinted on the parking lot. Above, you see the City Field for those of you who follow baseball, and you see also the Jamaica Bay, which is just above the body of water above. You see the Grand Central Parkway to the left, a major highway, and then all the way upper left, you see Corona, basically. Connected to the park, the Flushing Meadows Corona Park, with 2 bridges, one of which is a pedestrian bridge, the other one is a classical kind of vehicular bridge with some pedestrian facilities. And so you can see Corona over there, you can see it also here. On the left, the red square is basically where Corona Plaza is, right next to Roosevelt Avenue. And on the right, you can see the things I just described, the Queens Museum, the remnants of the 1939 and 1964 World Fairs, the park, and then the USDA Tennis Center, for those of you who follow tennis. So again, Queens Museum and Corona Plaza. And then in 2002, the museum, Queens Museum, as many museums across the world and in the US, begins to lose audiences. And so in search for what would the museum of the 21st century look like and how would it work, the museum hires Tom Finkelpearl as an executive director. Now, Finkelpearl is also a theorist of social practice or socially engaged art. And just before he was hired there, he published the book, What We Made, Conversations on Art and Social Cooperation. In the meantime, he has a couple of more books on it, but basically a really a prominent social practice, socially engaged art theorist. And then he and his team engage in figuring out what would be a different way of being a museum. This is super important because, in fact, most of the resources for the creation of the plaza then were funneled in some ways by or through the museum, as you will see. Now, the museum at the time, as many of you may know, museums usually have educational department and curatorial departments. But at the time, the Queen's Museum also had these two departments. What then Tom Finkerpohl and his team do is they create a community development and public programs department and dedicate half of the operating budget to this new department. They hire a community organizer, the first community organizer ever hired by a museum in the United States, Jayashree Abichandani, who is from Queens, has broad networks with community organizations and political organizations in Queens. And then later on, Maria Alexandra as coordinator of an organizer of Corona Plaza. And then within 3 years span, Prerana Reddy, who was then the first director of the public programs. So the museum begins to then locate places outside of the walls of the museum where, through socially engaged art, they could, in fact, be present in the communities that they serve, in Corona primarily. And so they identify Corona Plaza, or at that point, this parking lot, in fact, as a really wonderful site in the middle of the community, to situate their operations. That's how, basically, after the first couple of art projects in the social art projects and public art projects in the plaza, they realized that this is actually an ideal space. And that in order to move beyond exhibiting the immigrant-created art in the museum to the actual community engagement and community development project, they will need to be present in the heart of the community. So together with the Queens Economic Development Corporation, they realized that, in fact, Corona Plaza, creating a plaza through, at that point, newly established public plaza program would actually be something they would be interested in. So they begin to create then events, because in order to get the permission to establish the public plaza through the DOT, Department of Transportation program, you have to prove that you actually have the ability to organize public events, meaningful community events in the neighborhood, in the area. So they organized a number of events between 2008 and 2011. And what is really important about this, and that's why I want to keep this slide for just a little while to explain this. So together with celebrating, for example, Ecuadorian National Day and a number of Mexican and Colombian holidays and so on and so forth, they also organize, you see the white tents. So what they did is they also organized social services and public health or health services. Every single time they would organize a celebration of some kind, a festival of some kind. Because Corona is one of the poorest, economically speaking, not culturally, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. It was the hardest hit by the COVID pandemic, among the 3 hardest hit neighborhoods. It has an incredible rate, which is almost triple the rate of Manhattan, for example, of heart disease, and many other problems, high blood pressures, diabetes, and so on and so forth. And so what they would do is they would always provide social services, for example, advising on how to get, how to get the legal status in the United States, or how to get the citizenship, together with, for example, health stations, all under the white tents, measuring blood pressure, introducing, healthy habits with nutritionists from the nearby Elmhurst Hospital. And then they even went to, so Corona Cares, for example, 2007 is an event where you would actually have cares. You would have, obviously, all types of approaches to care, all kinds of care present during the event in the plaza. And then they published an amazing book called The Healthy Taste of Corona, which is basically a cookbook, which takes most of the recipes, most popular recipes from the neighborhood of the different communities, immigrant communities in the neighborhood. And then in collaboration with, as you can see on the slide, with the nutritionist, they change these recipes to make them out of the healthiest of ingredients, in order to basically move these communities from bad habits in terms of eating to basically a more healthy habits. Some of the events you can see here, numerous cultural events, festivals, and so on and so forth. And then here you begin to see how in 2010, 2011, The Queen's Museum then joined forces with Queen's College, which is basically a part of a city university of New York. And on the upper slide, you see Tom Finkelpool on the right. In the middle, Chloe Bass. And on the left, you see Greg Cholette. Greg Cholette and Chloe Bass now collaboratively lead social practice CUNY, which again is a social practice art program at Hunter College, which is a part of the City University of New York. And Greg himself is also one of the most prominent theorists and practitioners of socially engaged art. Together, they create social practice queens. And the first project, that they, interestingly and importantly as well, they also begin to attract a lot of funding for this initiative. And some of it is city and state funding, some of it is from private foundations, some from CUNY, and so on. And so the first, one of the first major projects, it ended up actually being the flagship project of this collaboration, is called the Immigrant Movement International. They invited a Cuban artist, Tania Bruguera, who then initiated this project, Immigrant Movement International, IMI, which initially was supposed to be a political movement, which would actually create a political party, immigrant political party in the city, but it never became a political party. In fact, it became really literally as it was supposed to be, a social practice art project initiative. Through it, they organized for the first time, so they got, while the plaza was still under construction, they organized in that little space nearby, 50 meters away from the plaza on Roosevelt Avenue. They began to organize the events that basically you would incubate all kinds of projects and initiatives, but also dispositions towards, activating the plaza as a meaningful public space for immigrant communities. You can see here, from youth orchestra at the bottom right, to cooking classes, to cycling classes, to English language classes, because actually Corona is a heavily Latino immigrant neighborhood where nearly 80% have basic or no English proficiency at all. And then some of those events would actually take place also within the walls of the museum. This is one of those large printmaking events in the museum itself. So we try to map out the number of institutions and organizations, community-based, city, so public, civil society, and market-based organizations involved in the making of the plaza. And this is a diagram. So in this, surrounded with red, in a red circle, you see Corona Plaza in the middle. In this slide, you see basically the three major partners. I will describe their roles now. The Department of Transportation, Queen's Museum, and the Queen's Economic Development Corporation. And then each of them had a network of partners that were involved in the actual creation, the making, and operation and maintenance of the plaza. Maintenance is one of the most important things here, as you will see. So the deal made in 2011 was that Department of Transportation, whose program has been the Public Plaza program, signs a contract with Queen's Economic Development Corporation and the Queen's Museum. Queen's Economic Development Corporation provides funds for the maintenance of the plaza, which basically was about $60,000 at that time, a year annually. And then the Queen's Museum provides basically what they call the programming of the plaza. In other words, they provided spaces and environments and conditions for, first of all, the conceptualization of the plaza. In other words, the involvement of the community into the planning process and design process, and then also the programming of the plaza, meaning literally curating public events that would take place at the newly made plaza. These are the images from 2011-12. This is what the DOT, Department of Transportation, calls a temporary plaza. So once you prove that you have the capability of organizing public events and programming and taking care of a public space, they then come and basically pave, but very basic operation, pave now, in this case, this previously parking lot and this thoroughfare. And then they add planters, as you can see here, they add planters with trees usually kind of, some trees and plants, lower plants and flowers and so on and so forth, in order to beautify the plaza. And then they add, as you will see on a couple of slides, add movable chairs and umbrellas. So the next step after the temporary plaza was established was basically how to curate the program, the plaza so that it continues to serve local communities. And you can see here there is again a number of events would take place, collaborative, hands-on events, most of them led through the social practice art approach. Now, one of the important things, and this is the first time that something like that really happened, is that are the Corona Plaza workshops, which basically took place in order to involve local communities, people who are simply local residents, right? Local community, many of who are undocumented and speak no English, as I already said. And most of who, particularly women who are in charge of basically stewarding families, community spaces, churches, and so on and so forth, they have never been to Manhattan before this project started. So you can imagine it's a 12-mile distance, but they simply never visited Manhattan. So what they started to do is these workshops, some of them most of them actually led by the students of social practice CUNY, and then students in the social practice Queens program. And so they would engage communities through all kinds of workshops, hands-on workshops, and then, of course, looking at the plans, looking at the spaces. And then you can see in the upper left corner, for example, Kilian Riano, an architect, a friend of mine and colleague, who had done a couple of installations in the plaza on behalf of the Queens Museum, basically explaining to local residents what would happen if. So in other words, what if, right? So these are some of the slides of these workshops. And then for the first time ever, this is one of the installations that Kilian and his office did in Corona Plaza. This is 2012, 13. And this is pretty much also the time when I started being involved through Kilian, in fact, in 2014. And so on the upper left slide, you see basically one of the workshops. This is the first time that the Department of Transportation officials and the designers of the plaza would actually be engaged directly with the community through simultaneous translation, where they would describe what they're thinking about, and then the community would basically respond. And you will hear one of the testimonies of a person, an individual who participated in this in a couple of minutes through in our film. So you can see the continuous engagement for 4 years. So let me just say that this engagement started in 2003, 2004, and the permanent plaza was actually established in 2018. So this is 14 years plus of continuous work on making this plaza a reality. And you can see also the children's workshops and all kinds of art projects, debates also on some of the slides, and so on. And then in 2016-17, the designers, out of all the interactions with the communities and learning from them, they also began to draft some of the concepts. So this was concept one, which actually was the final thing that gave basically this proposed plan. You will hear a little bit again testimonies from some of the participants in the process, community members and leaders who explain why the Central Plaza and why the sun rays and all of that. You will see that in a moment. But basically, this was the first the first proposed plan, which ended up more or less what was in fact built. And what is really interesting to understand is that there are 3 layers to this plaza. And you will hear the landscape designer or landscape architect, the chief architect of the plaza, explain this. And the 3 layers are the plaza, the town square, and the mercado, the marketplace. All 3 are very important for this particular community or these communities. They're important back home, and they're also important in this new place where they landed, where they live and work. The plaza being a more contemplative space, the town square being basically a space, as the designer himself would say, we'll say, a place for democracy. In other words, a place where people come to debate, protest, and participate in democratic life, which is for the first time enabled in Corona, in the history of Corona. And then Mercado, of course, is the marketplace. The people who sell in the plaza nowadays support over 200 families in Corona from selling in the plaza. They sell food, and you will see in the slides now, they sell mostly food, but also all kinds of handmade artifacts. This is a slide when the ground is broken for the permanent plaza, and the permanent plaza opens in June of 2018. Again, to a great success. People were super happy. They organized, there were many volunteers who organized the maintenance of these mobile chairs and tables. They would come early in the morning, set everything up. At night, at 10 or 11 p.m., they would come and collect all of this and clean and so on and so forth. So the plaza really was a place for not a community gathering, because there are many communities here. So for the gathering of different communities, which also have different views on how life in the neighborhood should be organized. So therefore, a fairly political space. Then Corona Green Market, for the first time, again, a green market, which took place once or twice a week. And then one of the most important organizations that emerged out of this is Mujeres en Movimiento. It's an organization of women who were most of them members of the Immigrant Movement International, who decided at some point, who basically one of them, you will hear her speak in the video, was the leader and the founder. She was a Zumba instructor. And in order to basically make women in the neighborhood, in the community, healthier, she introduced dancing classes, first inside and then in the plaza. And then they became politically active. So one of their projects was, in fact, as they learned how to cycle, how to repair bicycles, through some of the workshops in the Immigrant Movement International, they basically realized then, as they started to cycle, that one of the streets in their neighborhood, like a couple of blocks away from Corona Plaza, is 111th Street, which was actually one of the deadliest streets in the city. The reason why is because it was unregulated. There are many schools and kindergartens on that street. And so most of the victims were children and parents. So what they did is they started patrolling the neighborhood. So these are the ladies who, most of them, even to this day, have limited or no English proficiency. Most of them, again, as I said, live in Corona, work in Corona, and they rarely venture out of Corona. So suddenly these women, through this immigrant movement, through the socially engaged art, and through the process of the designing and making of the plaza, they started being basically politically active. And so what they decided is to actually get to a fight with the city hall in order to get the resources to redesign the street. And this is what they did. So you can see it now with helmets and yellow vests. They cruised the neighborhood. They went to the city hall, and basically at the end they won. So Mayor at that time, Mayor De Blasio, supported their initiative, and the 111th Street, which I don't have slides of as it was redesigned because I don't want to expand the story, was redesigned and became one of the safest streets. And most of them actually now, of course, cycle safely through the neighborhood. And another initiative which was born out of this entire process was, in fact, the expansion of the bid. Now, you will remember that in the beginning, I said that one aspect of this, one undesirable aspect of the Public Plaza program and other such policies of the Bloomsbury administration was to basically turn and create privatization-ready spaces and neighborhoods in the neighborhoods where mostly working class and immigrant communities live, not only in Queens, but many in Queens, particularly along the axis of, if you remember from the beginning, Olympic X, which is basically Roosevelt Avenue. So the street in the middle is the Olympic X, is that upper right part of the Olympic X, Roosevelt Avenue. And then what you see on the left is was existing business improvement district. Business improvement districts are organizations, associations of businesses in an area in which they have the right then to basically privatize the neighborhood. What was proposed by the city is that this 82nd Street bid expands all the way to 104th Street, which you can see far right, and you can see the Corona Plaza there as a gray triangle. So basically what they wanted is to expand the bid so that the business improvement district, in fact, becomes in charge of the entire stretch of Roosevelt Avenue, including the Corona Plaza, which really meant, in fact, the realization of the project of creating a commercial corridor along Roosevelt Avenue. However, people who were activated through this process organized this most efficient organization is still called Queens Neighborhoods United. One of my students actually was a leader of this organization, and you can see him in basically all three slides. I don't have a pointer now to show who he is. So what they did is, you can see the upper right slide is a living room along Roosevelt Avenue. Again, social practice art. So what they did is they created a series of events, performances, and gathering spaces. They created a documentary film, and they finally, after 3 years, managed to defeat the expansion of the bid. Basically, through organizing, local residents defeated some of the most wealthiest developers and the city hall in their project of expanding and privatizing Roosevelt Avenue, creating a commercial corridor. Then, a number of political protests occurs on the plaza, and still does, until this is the first time Donald Trump won presidency, and so immediately after, ICE, of course, started arresting illegal immigrants. This neighborhood, these communities have a huge number of undocumented immigrants. It's estimated that 30 to 40% of all residents of Corona, which are estimated to be at about 220,000, are undocumented. And most of the street vendors are undocumented. So they started actually deportations. They started them again now. And then when the Corona pandemic hit, the Corona Plaza became, as you can see here, the site for the distribution of medical supplies, of providing medical care. Most people in Corona have no health insurance to speak of, absolutely no health insurance of any kind. So they're directly exposed. And so the city, the nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations use the plaza as a hub to organize basically distribution, the health and social services. Some of the spaces in the museum were transformed into the spaces for the collection and distribution of food through the program, their program called Familias Unidas. And then you can see while many of the places, particularly the ones I showed in the beginning, Hudson Yards and High Line and so on, all of them were closed during the pandemic, particularly in the beginning of the pandemic. Of course, if you can see the images from 2021, Corona was not. Everybody's wearing a mask, but they celebrated the Ecuadorian National Day, for example, in October 21. And so Corona became, you can see here, people with masks as well. Corona stay vibrant. And in fact, a couple of years ago, the New York Times has the 100 best places every year to eat in the city. And Corona Plaza was number 34. So out of all the Michelin stars, all the amazing, incredible restaurants in this city, Corona Plaza was actually 34th. So it tells you, in fact, how vibrant, how incredible, how good food, of course, local domestic food, is being cooked and offered in Corona. Now, this is a street vendor association and another organization that organizes street vendors in Corona, and they try to basically organize them in order to put the resistance to deportations and police raids and ICE raids and so on and so forth. And they, in fact, managed to do that. They created an association. You will hear about it right now in the video. Right now, the Mayor Adams is in fact as privatization friendly and gentrification friendly as Mayor Bloomberg was. And so he has reintroduced many of the policies of the Bloomberg administration. And despite all the charges, criminal charges against him, he's still a mayor of New York City. For those of you who can follow the news, otherwise this actually may be irrelevant. But what is relevant is that he is, it seems right now that his policies are aligned or will be aligned with the policies of the Trump administration, vis-a-vis, of course, the immigration laws and policies. And so it's yet to be seen how this is going to now affect the plaza in more robust ways than we have ever seen so far. So, Luisa, shall we move now to show a few clips from the film?
Yes, okay, let me share this.
Y el movimiento inmigrante internacional con el apoyo del museo.
Just move it a little bit back. Okay, right here. So let me just say that in the last 3 years, we made a documentary film. It's about a 45-minute documentary, not yet done. So I'm showing you basically a non-final version of the documentary. We still need to introduce a few things. But the documentary is based on 34 plus interviews with participants in this process of making of this Corona Plaza. And you will see some community activists, street vendors. You will not see city officials in these clips, but Luisa will explain. We will make this video, this film, available through the Public Space Academy website, probably sometimes in April. So let me just show you now a couple of clips.
Aquí desde 2008 y el movimiento inmigrante internacional con el apoyo del museo empezó en el 2011, en abril de 2011. Y cuando vino la propuesta de convertir esto en una plaza, recuerdo que participé en las conversaciones, nos dieron DVDs con las descripciones, con todos los detalles. O sea, fue algo que para mí fue importante porque fue inclusivo. O sea, fue de pararnos en la plaza, ver realmente qué era lo que estaban proponiendo, cómo se vería, qué significaría eso para nuestra comunidad. Pues empezamos a hacer cosas alrededor de la plaza y para cuando finalmente se logró, pues el museo estaba súper integrado haciendo eventos todos los fines de semana con Mónica, Oye Corona. Me acuerdo que ella creó este evento Oye Corona, que era las tardes de los domingos donde se reunían gente de la comunidad, hacían actividades artísticas. Primera vez, cuando me invitaron, yo estaba, fue la gente en Movimiento Inmigrante, fueron con la invitación, que vamos a tener una conversación sobre la plaza y esto. El movimiento, acuérdate que estaba apoyado por el Museo de Queens, o sea, esto venía todo del Museo de Queens, con Tom y todo esto, Ferrana. Y entonces, pues, ¿qué se hablaba? Se hablaba del sueño de la plaza.
I'm a community activist, live in the United States for over 35 years. And I became an activist looking for justice in my immigrant community. And also was curious for me, especially the infrastructure that people live, parks, streets, the whole neighborhood, especially the small businesses that people create on the streets, on the storefronts. I noticed that this was something missing. So that's how I became part of the redesign of Corona Plaza. Years back with the Queens Museum. As an Andino, we believe in the Pachamama, and that's how the Inti, which is the sun, is also part of the plaza. And so the idea was when people have activities in the park and they remember where they're coming from and what the plaza means for them. It's a center where people come.
One of the things that struck me is that this plaza can be viewed from above because you can see it from the subway. I knew it had to be a strong design. The ideas of the rays, the sort of curvaceous design, was a way of drawing people into the plaza as a visual cue. The big one for me coming in to the design and seeing what we were dealing with, how it was such an important place for the community that was going to be less of a plaza and more of a town square. I think sometimes plazas are places where people gather to retreat from urban life, you know. But there's not a lot of activity going on. They're quite passive, whereas a town square has to be left open and has to be used by the community as a part of democracy, a place where people gather and discuss. And so it can be quite noisy. There was always pressure. And when we started there was a lot of informal business activities, the vendors around. There was a lot of tension as well because they get shooed away, and there was always a market there. We knew that the space needed to cater for the green market, and we knew one thing that hasn't been built was a kiosk. It was always at the front of our minds that this was going to be used somehow for business activities, including the festivals. There was a lot of considerations, but a lot of the stuff gets removed during the design process.
When COVID...
Now let me move it to the next part. Here.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Rosario Troncoso. Yo comencé a vender aquí en la plaza por motivo de la pandemia, que perdí mi trabajo, y a raíz de la pandemia pues empezamos a ver que la gente empezaba a venir a vender, pero con miedo, no lo hacía hasta que el gobernador, que estaba Cuomo, dio la autorización de que los vendedores ambulantes en la ciudad no los iban a molestar por la pandemia, que sabían que mucha gente había perdido sus empleos y los iban a dejar trabajar mientras durara la pandemia. ¿Cómo me involucré? Porque Street Vendor fue los que empezaron a venir a organizarnos después de que durante la pandemia querían organizarnos de cómo trabajar, porque empezó a venir mucha gente a querer trabajar aquí, pero era muy desorganizado. Entonces ellos nos empezaron a reunir para poder trabajar más tranquilos, para todo, y de ahí surgió el proyecto de hacer una asociación de vendedores de aquí de Corona Plaza, vendedores ambulantes. Tardamos casi 2 años para lograr ese proyecto. Entonces fue como empezamos a hacerlo, me empecé a involucrar más, se logró la asociación, se formó la mesa directiva, y pues gracias a que anduve hablando con muchos de los compañeros, ellos me eligieron como presidenta de la mesa directiva de la Asociación de Vendedores de Corona Plaza. Era unirnos, y estamos en ese proceso de seguir luchando, seguir uniéndonos para lograr que nos dejen trabajar aquí un poco más tranquilos.
The challenge is...
Okay, and then the final segment. Again, María Canela.
Aquí hay mucha oportunidad para poder, tu voz vale mucho.
Al principio era un lugar que fue creado para la gente sentarse allí, disfrutar en familia, y pues después vinieron los eventos, y dice, ¿por qué no? Y después de allí, mira cómo es la plaza hoy día, o sea, es como que la comunidad misma va dando la forma a las cosas, de acuerdo a la necesidad. Y siempre y cuando hayan lugares como eso, deberían haber 1000 plazas de esta. Hay tantos lugarcitos pequeños que pueden hacer cambios grandes en la comunidad, porque es como, creas el espacio, se lo das a la gente, y es como masilla, la gente va dándole forma. Yo creo que el papel de nosotros como comunidad es ayudar a seguir mejorando los espacios, que sean de bien para todos, pero también que nos sirvan.
Yo quiero pensar que estamos todavía mucho a tiempo para hacer el trabajo en comunidad y colectivamente. O sea, es por eso la importancia también de que como mujeres empezamos a decir, bueno, tenemos que salir a manejar bicicleta. Esa es otra forma también de romper con el patriarcado, de usar los espacios que están libres y sentir libertad, y de sentir que también la bicicleta es otra forma de embellecer la vida. Para mí es importante estos espacios abiertos porque nos da la libertad de sentirnos también de sentirnos que pertenecemos a cualquier espacio, no tan solo al techo que estoy pagando donde yo vivo, pero también en espacios públicos es muy importante el encontrarnos, los encuentros y abrir ciertos o cualquier tipo de conversación diversa, porque también esa es otra manera también del compartir, del conocer, de este encuentro. De hecho, a veces yo luego digo, son como encuentros de saberes, porque a lo mejor lo que tú sabes, yo no lo sé, y la otra, pues como dicen, ¿no? Solo entre todos sabemos, los abuelos dicen, solo entre todos sabemos todo y solo entre todos podemos todo.
Corona Plaza has really rendered itself the epicenter of the struggle and the fight over the means of production of public space. In my view, Corona Plaza is a critical project which should be understood as a prototype of new sets of relationships, ensembles of relationships between the government, civil society, communities, and individuals living in working class and immigrant neighborhoods in the city. In fact,
okay, that's that.
Thank you, Miodrag. This is the end of your lecture, if I understand well, right?
Yes. I'm sorry I went 3 minutes over time.
No, that's fine, because your case study actually is super interesting. So I've been following this case study since 2020.
That's right.
When we had a webinar that was part of the initiative during the pandemic 2020, a year without public space, that we promoted through the Journal of Public Space. And then later, I was attending your presentation at the New York Symposium, Public Space Challenges.
Exactly.
And then we met at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission in Italy, and now today. And there are always more details when you present.
Yes, and it's still not done. In fact, I'm completing this manuscript and completing the film. But yes, it's an ongoing project. In many places like this, I'm sure you would agree with that. It's one thing to look at the documents themselves. It's another thing to look at the media coverage and this and that. But when you start talking to people who have been involved, finding the people who can give you relevant information and who can really tell you what happened and telling them an accurate story. You can never be unbiased, but telling an accurate story what happened is really, really difficult. So yeah, it takes an enormous amount of time.
Well, I hope our audience enjoyed your lecture, which is recorded and can be rewatched also later. But I think we have some questions already. So I would like to invite Egle on stage to manage the Q&A session. Or maybe, Egle, you have some questions.
Well, yes, in fact, I do. And thank you so much for introducing the Corona Piazza for us, all the complexities. And actually, my question is somewhat related to the question that from the audience. So maybe I'll start with the audience. Just before that, I would like to share that today, through our different platforms, we had around 15 viewers. And we hope that they are still thinking about questions, and I encourage them to write those on the chat on different platforms. So I would like to start with the question from the audience. It's by CJ Opperhauser. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right. He's asking more probably about the first part of the piazza and the organization. He's wondering if the movable furniture was totally locked up at night, and at what time it would be made available, and if that task was reliably done by volunteers.
Yes. It was movable. Yeah, it was movable. That's as I think CJ Oberhauser may know. That's simply a matter of policy in your city, and it all goes back to William H. White, and it's a longer story. But yes, it's movable. Both tables and chairs are foldable and movable, and they were in the very beginning. The volunteers were in charge of. I mean, volunteers insisted they wanted to be in charge of many aspects of the maintenance of the plaza. One of them was that, and so there were groups of volunteers who would come at what time? Usually like 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and then at night when it gets dark. And the reason why they wanted to do that, because another problem in Corona and in Queens in general, but in Corona, is also an extensive use of alcohol during particularly night hours. So what they wanted is to disable basically people who would come there and drink. And so they would take all of the chairs and tables, fold them, and then lock them to some of the fences nearby, and then come back in the morning and open it up. Now, that's no longer the case. This is a great question, because that question goes right to the question of maintenance of the plaza. So the volunteers were fantastic in the beginning. The volunteers are always fantastic for any kind of involvement, right? But how reliable they are, that's another question. And so there were other people who were also commissioned, hired, involved through the Horticultural Society of New York. And there were people who were then paid through those $60,000 I mentioned before that cost. It used to cost actually at that time to maintain the plaza. They were hired to do all kinds of services, including also then take care of the furniture. If your audience wants to see more about that, there is a really wonderful brief documentary done by Street Films, and their crew was there when on the day the plaza opened, and they interviewed the volunteers and the public officials and everybody, and the excitement is palpable. And so some of the volunteers talk about how they want to engage. This is our plaza, this is our place, and they wanted to take care of it and be engaged. But remember that many of them are undocumented, and after the first Trump administration, things have changed, and now they're changing again.
Yes, well, very challenging. Also, during the documentary that you showed, there was this very clear tension, the fact that people are fighting to reclaim the space. This is also very important to highlight that public space is not always joyful, successful, and made of very positive, feelings.
Exactly.
Sometimes, the struggle for public space is made through fights and conflicts, because, usually, especially in this way to present public space, we are mostly exposed to very nice, pictures of people, having fun or being smiling in very positive, mood.
Exactly.
But in fact, to reach that, in some cases, you have to fight.
And in practice, most people actually are not really interested in these beautified images of public space. They really wanted to work. They wanted to work for themselves, for their communities, for their families. And so, how do you really manage that? It's very difficult because, this city is humongous. And of course, the Department of Transportation, as any other department of the city, has an enormous job. I mean, imagine being in charge of all the streets and squares and plazas and bridges and roads. And I mean, it's an incredible job. So it is very difficult to then be super responsive to every single need of every single community across this enormous territory. Some departments, the Department of Transportation doesn't have, they have a community engagement arm, but not as developed. Parks Department has a very developed network of mediators or third-party organizations or civil society organizations, non-profits, that basically community-based organizations that work with communities, and then they gather the needs and aspirations of the community, and they then communicate with the people in charge at the Parks Department. And so they have this very vibrant network of feeders, basically, if you will, right? So that they know that how to actually respond to specific needs in specific communities. For Department of Transportation, that's more difficult, arguably, and so it's hit or miss. So it's mostly relies on centralized planning. So this case is the first case where they really step away from an absolute adherence to centralized planning. And as I said, it's the first time that the officials and the designers come to a community space to discuss what would happen in the plaza. So it's a really special case, a very pioneering case in many ways.
Yes, also, if we want to compare this space to some other public areas in downtown New York, for example, which are more related to tourism, commercial venues, and they are into this process, as you said, of beautification.
That's right.
Yes, so...
Yeah, so that's Hudson Yards, for example, the Hudson Yards Plaza, right? High Line, yep.
Yes, probably I would like to extend with my question on the self-organization a little bit. Yeah. And basically, for sure, we see that there were so many challenges from the outside, the fight in many levels, but were there also internal challenges between the communities, considering all the cultural aspects, and regarding new initiatives, regarding maintenance, how those were addressed?
Yeah, very good question. Yes, there are many struggles. Because as I pointed out, it's not a single community. So it's not a homogeneous kind of community there. There are multiple communities. And so the fact is that, in terms of religion, most of these communities are Catholic. In terms of language, most of them speak Spanish. Not all, but most of them, right? So there is some homogeneity there. In other words, there are reasons to believe that they actually would really at least understand each other at some basic level. And that is the case. However, there are also really strict differences. And there may be differences not necessarily between Peruvians and Colombians, but there are differences between Peruvians of African origin and Peruvians of European origin. And all of that plays into this conceptualization and the use of the programming of the plaza. So there are many internal struggles. Since I am not from Latin America, and I don't speak Spanish, I have some basic knowledge. For me, it was very difficult to get to the nuanced differences between these groups. And that's why also it's taking an enormous amount of time, although some of my research assistants, of course, are fluent in Spanish, are from Latin American countries. So yes, so there are many struggles within. The museum did a remarkable job in managing all of that, but also because people working at the museum were people from the communities. So they managed to do everything. You cannot please everyone. You cannot do everything, right? You always have limited resources, and that's what they did as well as we did with this film. So in a way, at the end of the day, that's why I insisted on a couple of occasions today. It's a struggle. It's a real struggle. It's a struggle from within. It's a struggle from without. It's a struggle of the communities towards the city. It's a struggle of the city to implement their own project, which is, commercialization, creation of these commercial corridors, basically privatization, but also centralization. And then the resistance of the local communities, who are, again, not homogeneous at all, to come together and organize in order to put resistance to this plan, and then at the same time organize themselves enough to know what are the kind of the matters of common concern, and what they all can do in relation to how the plaza is organized. So yes, it's struggle all over, conflicts and struggles. And that's why, to Luisa's points, I think this is a great example that you can have a working plaza, a great public space that was actually born out of a struggle. It's not a beautification. It's not, again, it's not commercialization. It's not really based on consumption. It's really based on a struggle of immigrant communities to get a dignified public space.
Yes, very relevant. And I see a comment of appreciation here. If you want to show, Egle.
Yes, I will show. It's great to always receive such comments. So Opperhauser, he's thanking for putting this on, and to Miodrag for enlightening exploration on the Space and project, and especially appreciate acknowledging the multiplicity of communities here and letting the videos give folks a voice. So
thank you. That's very nice. Thank you.
Yes, and as Miodrag already mentioned, we will, thanks to Miodrag who accepted this invitation, we will publish, when it will be ready in April, most probably, we will publish the documentary video on Corona Plaza on our Public Space Academy Open edX platform, where you can actually attend all our courses, and so that we can link the lecture, today's lecture, to the documentary film. And this is also very important because in our academy we try to be open to different formats, and including also documentary films is a way to tell stories and to go deep on the ground to understand the complexity, contradictions, challenges, and how to actually manage in the long term successful public spaces. So this is absolutely great, Miodrag. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you both for the invitation. And look forward to seeing you soon, here or there.
Yes, hopefully soon in New York or in Bologna. Who knows?
Right. That's right.
Or somewhere else.
That's right. Or online. But anyway, thank you for the opportunity. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.